What do you do on Sundays?
We talk about Cate Blanchett, the acting, the costumes, the awards, but mostly the Blanchett of it all.
I'm not acting.
You think this is a love affair?
I saw you, Erica. Meeting in the middle.
This is Sundays with Cate, and I'm your host, Murtada Elfadl. Welcome to Sundays with Cate. This is your host, Murtada Elfadl, and this is another episode where we talk about the movie that everybody's been asking for as long as I have been doing this podcast, which has been a couple of years now. I can't believe it. But anyway, I'm very excited to talk about Carol again. And this time, my guest is writer and film programmer Shayna Maci Warner. Shayna, hello.
Wow, hello. I can't believe I'm on this much anticipated episode.
Yes, people love Carol, as both of us do. So this is like the perfect time around Christmas, around the New Year to talk about Carol. I'm so happy that you are able to join me tonight.
Thank you for having me. Yeah, this is my Christmas movie. For sure.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It is my Christmas movie. It's also, even though it was shot in Cincinnati, it's such a New York movie. And I know they played at the Metrograph. So I always go, I haven't been because of COVID, but before COVID, it was a yearly ritual. So every Christmas since it was released, I have seen Carol.
That's so beautiful. I love that.
Yes. Usually there's two movies I go to see. Meet Me in St. Louis and Carol. And those are the two Christmas movies that I see every year.
Is there a connection between the two of them for you?
I mean, apart from that, I love Cate Blanchett and I love Judy Garland. I don't think so.
Yeah, I feel like there's a spiritual connection there.
Yes.
Between the two leads.
I mean, they're both, I think Meet Me in St. Louis maybe is the 40s, right? It's not even the 50s. So it's not the same period. I was going to say the link is the period, but it's not really. It's about a decade off, but still. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So Shayna, tell me, first I want to ask you about your relationship with Carol. So do you remember the first time you saw it and sort of your first impression about it?
Of course. Oh my goodness. Sometimes I can't, with certain films, but this one I absolutely remember. I watched it with one of the only friends I had in college who would go see lesbian movies with me in theaters. And we went to Santa Monica, because I was living in Los Angeles at the time, Santa Monica Theater. It was like an 11 a.m. matinee. There were two other people in the theater. And we were so excited because we had been hearing so much about it. Like, this was the lesbian movie. And I remember watching it and thinking like, oh, okay, I guess that was all right. I guess it was pretty. But I think that the hype around it, this always happens to me. Whenever there's hype around a movie, mm-hmm. I'm just like uber critical of it. Mm-hmm. And I've calmed down a little bit over the years, but this was the same thing that happened to me as with Portrait of a Lady on Fire, mm-hmm. when it had been so hyped. And I went in and I was like, well, I guess that was a lesbian movie. And like, there's not that much that's new about it. I guess it was very well done. Okay. But over the years, something keeps drawing me back to it. And the second time I watched it, because it was available on Netflix or something, mm-hmm. I thought, wait a minute, there's something else here. Like, why am I more drawn to it? And it's one of those films that I appreciate more and more every time that I watch it.
Yeah. I mean, it's so richly detailed that repeat viewings, you just discover new things every time you watch it. So I was like a little deep into this movie from the beginning because I love Cate, obviously, because I have this podcast about her filmography. And I also love Todd Haynes. And so when I heard that they were doing another movie together, they have done I'm Not There, I immediately bought the book and read it. And the book is so gorgeous and beautiful. And then this movie took forever to come out, like from announcement to until it was released. It was maybe 3-4 years. It was a long time. And they were like, Mia Wasikowska was going to play Rooney Mara's role, and then it was Rooney, and then the movie was shot, and then it was coming out in 2014, and then it wasn't. It was delayed to 2015. So it was a long time. So all this time I'm just anticipating, and there was a lot of people online like me anticipating this movie. There was even a blog dedicated to following this movie, which I got a lot of information on. And fans of the real ones know, fans who are listening, fans of Carol who are listening to this podcast will know which blog I'm talking about. I'll link to it in the notes for this podcast. But so there was like a community before, and I was kind of part of that community. And then it played at New York Film Fest. Thank God New York Film Fest plays all the good movies, and that's when I saw it. I think September of 2015, and
wow.
So all that anticipation, it was love at first sight for me, anyway.
That's so nice when you get that payoff.
Yeah,
I love that.
Let's introduce Carol. I mean, everybody listening, I think, know what Carol is and what is it about, but I think, so Carol is a story set in the 1950s in New York about a department store clerk called Therese Belivet. These names are amazing. Played by Rooney Mara. According to Letterboxd, she dreams of a better life, but falls for an older married woman. And so that one is, of course, Carol, played by Cate Blanchett. And then I think what I really wanted to talk to you in this episode of the podcast about Carol is that we are two queer people, and this is a queer movie. And so we want to talk about sort of like the cultural impact of this movie for queer people, because this was a lesbian film made by queer people. Todd Haynes, who directed, is a queer man. It was adapted from Patricia Highsmith, who was queer, adapted by Phyllis Nagy, who is also queer. Christine Vachon, one of the producers, is queer. And Sarah Paulson, one of the actors in the film, is also queer. These are the known queer people. There are some straights there, like Kate and Rooney and other people. But
alleged straight people.
Exactly, allegedly. But I feel like this film, when I talk to queer people, it comes up a lot. Like it's a movie that's lushly romantic with sort of a happy ending. Like it's not a complete happy ending. It's not like they're dancing, but it is a beautiful sort of ending. And the movie is, the participation of all these queer people in it sort of makes it special. Like, other queer movies that were mainstream and seminal, like Brokeback Mountain, for example, the people behind them were mostly straight. But this is the first time, like, at least a lot of the people behind the camera were queer, which I think what makes it stand out. As there's definitely lots of queer movies throughout the years. It's not by any means the first queer movie, but it's just the one that sort of got to the mainstream culture.
Yeah, I would definitely say that it broke through and that it's been buoyed by kind of a cultish following
Yes.
of queer people using so many pieces from the film as part of our kind of pop culture fabric now, which is wonderful and very funny and sexy sometimes. And of course I would agree with you that, there are many films that came before, and one specifically that I think about that was also directed, created, adapted from a queer woman's work is Desert Hearts. Of course,
yeah,
that was
absolutely.
also, one of that was the first, studio financed and distributed film by a lesbian director in the US anyway, about two queer women who also had that kind of ambiguous ending, that open ending that nobody has to start pulling out the hankies because suddenly queer women were denied the right to live again. But I think that Carol definitely, obviously, Desert Hearts is not as embedded in the mainstream still. Carol is recognizable. And certainly has so much star power behind it. Of course, we're on Sundays with Cate, so you know a little about that. But yeah, I think it's become a reference point for a lot of queer people in a very playful way. I think
And it definitely, I think when you say playful, that's always how I feel. Like I feel it's a movie that sort of transcended whatever happened the year it was released, whether people went to see it then or not. And I think Netflix played a large part in that because it was on Netflix for a long time. So that's more democratic. A lot of people saw it. And it's also, I remember when it sort of leaked, it leaked online, like, I don't know, a few months after it was released. And
Oh my God.
we don't endorse piracy on Sundays with Kate, but
Uh-huh.
as somebody who grew up in Sudan, and where there were no cinemas, new movies are not available, you see them years after they're released. Like, I was here in the US, but I also felt like, if I was back in Sudan and I was younger and the movie would have leaked, I would have definitely seen it. And so I was
Mhm.
happy for that movie to sort of reach people that way. And I think it is, to your point, because of the stars who are in it, but also it's that's sort of maybe what got it, like the press and the highlights from everybody, and everybody heard about it. But I also think in the end it's the movie itself.
Mm.
It's just, it works so beautifully, and it's done with such precise beauty, I think. And it's so, like, you feel so good watching it. I think that's why it endured, even though I know people say, oh, it didn't win these awards, or it didn't do that, or it didn't make that much money. But I think it just, in the end, it pre-made the culture.
Mm. It precise, I think, is a very good word for it. Very intentional.
Yes.
Everything is extremely intentional and also playful within the movie itself, which I really love. And I think it's funny that you mention this leaking online. I wasn't aware of this, but it makes a lot of sense because of Todd Haynes' previous work or some of his first work
Hmm.
that did not, leak online, but was really well known, and he became more known because it was passed around person to person, kind of outside of a regular cinema, and outside of streaming, certainly. But I'm thinking of his first work or among his first work of Superstar.
Superstar, yeah, which is
Yeah.
on YouTube if you want to watch
Yeah.
it. It's still there.
Which is still there. And just thinking about the cult behind that as well, the kind of democratization of access
Hmm.
of finding this battered VHS copy that was taped onto another VHS and just passing it around and creating this inside joke
Yeah, yeah.
among queer people, but still with a film that was so fun to watch and so precise and so detailed. So I love that Todd Haynes has this trajectory too.
Yeah, yeah, he does for sure. So let's dig into the movie a little bit. Carol, to me, like, if you read the screenplay, or if you're just listening to the words that Carol and Therese are saying, um, which I think is the genius of the screenplay by Phyllis Nagy, is that what they're saying to each other is so bland. They're talking about, with the exception of something like, flung out of space, or all these other wonderful things they say to each other. But a lot of what they're saying to each other is like, I'm having spinach, or, cream spinach. And, and they don't say, what are you doing on Sundays? Come visit me. It's all of these things that are just not they're not declaring anything, but when they look into each other's eyes, so that's the performance, but also the way they are shot,
Mm.
so many things are said. And Carol can't say, oh, um, I'm attracted to you, or I'm into you, or do you want to come over, or whatever it is that now we can say. But she can leave her gloves and forgets them
Mhm.
intentionally. And she can invite Therese to lunch. So it's all these intentional things, to what you were saying, that they're doing, but they're never saying it.
Never. They couldn't. No, and it's so funny that because it's so indirect, everything is so indirect. When something direct happens, it's like a shock.
Yeah.
It's very exciting, and I'm thinking too far ahead in the movie, I think, for the trajectory that we're taking on this podcast.
We can go
But
back and forth, that's
yeah,
fine.
okay. But yeah, it's actions. Action
Mhm.
speaks so much louder than words in this movie,
Yeah.
which I love.
Yeah, I mean, it reminds me when Harge, Carol's husband, says to her, when she explains to him what she did, she's like, "Oh, I forgot my gloves, she returned them, and I invited her over to thank her. And he's just like, that's bold. And it is bold. It is so bold that, somebody in the 1950s can do that. But it's also because, Carol is a rich lady and she has privilege and she knows that she can do this and be sort of out with no repercussions really to her life. But it's also bold that she could do this. Absolutely.
Carol is bold as hell. She is, incredibly so. I think of course, Abby is one of her exes, but I think that Carol has a very long line of exes. You kind of get the feeling because her seduction is so bold. I love that. I mean, Harge doesn't like that so much, but you just get the feeling that she has moves. The leather glove, that's a move. Mm-hmm. I love it.
I like the hat. That's another move.
I like the hat. Yeah. I like the hat. And she gives Therese a little once over. Amazing.
Yeah. And so, I talk a lot about like Cate in this podcast as a sort of 100% physical actor who acts with her whole body. Like she knows how to fill the frame, how she is in the frame. And so in this movie, in that first scene, which is a wonderful scene in the department store, it's all about that. Like she's acting not just with what she's saying or with her eyes and face, but with everything, the way she holds the cigarette, or she can't light the cigarette, or the way when she walks away and looks back. It's like, I love that performance so much. And I love watching her because I think it is a performance on two layers. She is playing Carol as a character, but she's also playing Carol as how Therese would see her, which is a more heightened way. So sometimes because I think Todd Haynes' camera is always from Therese's point of view. So we see Carol as Therese sees her, and she's always just a little more, a little better, a little more perfect. Just slightly doing slightly romanticized. But also, of course, because she has her own dilemma with her husband and with her daughter and all of that, she plays the character too.
That's so interesting. I didn't think of it that way. But certainly I think all of her, from her very first department store interaction with Therese, she does seem like she has come off the front of a pulp novel,
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Extremely statuesque, and her voice too, I think is so tailored to that idea of a fantasy. So that's so interesting.
Yeah. And yeah, her voice is very seductive and very low, and the way she says these lines. I mean, everybody, there's so many lines, but I think the first time that you just, sit and snap to attention is when they're at lunch and she says, what a strange girl you are, flung out of space. And
where'd that come from?
I know, it's such a brilliant line, like amazing. I think it's in the book, if I remember correctly. It's in the book. But it's also just the way that she delivers it. She doesn't emphasize it. It's just like, it's just, she flungs it out, just like Therese is supposed to be flung out of space.
Very true. Yeah, she plucks it from the ether and suddenly kind of zoned in. You're right. Makes you wake up. That's amazing. I love talking about this with you. This is so fun.
Yeah, I'm having fun too. I love this movie so much.
What a strange girl you are. Flung out of space.
And the other scene I wanted to talk to you about is when she picks her up to go to New Jersey to her house. So this is after the lunch. And that scene, the first time I saw this movie, that scene was the scene where I knew that I love this movie because it visualizes falling in love. Because, the scene is they're in the tunnel and you can't hear what they're saying to each other because it doesn't matter. Because it's like a memory, it's like a dream, and you never really remember what you're exactly saying in a memory or a dream. And like the screen is flooded with green, and they're in the tunnel, and there is a song on the radio, and I was like, oh, somebody found a way to visualize falling in love, that moment where two people are connecting.
Wow. That's really beautiful. It's so funny that thinking about the green, especially. I know that's a very much a Todd Haynes signature, but it also reminds me of a Wong Kar-wai
Mm,
color palette, who also
yeah,
I think is a filmmaker who very much focuses on that visualization of falling in love and
yeah.
that color wash and the idea that you don't actually have to know what they're saying. They're just it's not one of the like rom-com kind of montages where you're
Hmm.
supposed to believe like, oh, they're falling in love and they're doing all these silly things. How cute. It's like, no, it's a conversation. It can happen over the course of a conversation. And
Yeah. So, Shayna, tell me about a scene that you always remember when you think of Carol.
oh, so many. I would say the very first one, of course, I think this is such a Todd Haynes little joke. I would love to talk to him about this someday. But when Carol first comes up to the department store counter and meets Therese and is so frantic about finding this atrocious doll
Yeah, that's
for
all. It's crazy.
Rindy,
Yeah.
there's a little sign in the back of Therese, behind Therese, that says "Mommy's baby." And of course, it's referring to the dolls, but also that's the entire plot of Carol.
Totally. I
And I
love this.
love that. I love that little sign so much. And I think that's one of the things that in repeat viewings, I never would have really paid attention to that when I was watching it at first and thinking, oh, this is supposed to be a great lesbian love story. But I'm watching it and I'm like, oh, that's hilarious.
Yeah.
That's wonderful. Um, so I always think of that. Of course, I think of the love scene. I think it's short, but I think it's beautiful. And I think about again the boldness of Carol and again this is a Desert Hearts parallel too.
Mm,
Um, when it's New Year's Eve and they're both remarking upon not being alone and having each other, and it's that same kind of they're not really saying directly what they mean to say,
yeah.
but you get the idea. And Carol just escalates it by opening her robe.
Yes.
I love it. I love it. I love it. I'm like, yes, exactly. Action. And of course, there is a very I think in films there's not a great practice of verbal and informed consent.
Hmm.
So it's certainly something that you take with a grain of salt, but this is all about Therese and Carol and you know
Hmm.
what's about to happen. So that direct, bold, seductive move, letting literally like opening the door for Therese to then
Hmm.
say, take me to bed. I think about that. I think it's such a gorgeous and fluid and bold kind of a
Hmm.
scene. So I really love that scene as well.
Yeah. It is. It is. It is. I never thought of it in that way, but yes, I get your point. And also, I think later on in the scene, they do play a little bit with consent because she does say to her, "I want to see you." And I can actually, I've seen this movie so many times, but I'm not sure who says that to the other one. But one of them says, "I want." Therese
Yeah.
says that.
Oh yeah. Oh, like that they want each other. And also, you're right actually in a couple scenes later, um when Therese is suddenly regretting everything that's happened because of course, spoiler, Carol has been spied upon,
Hmm.
um, and is nasty, you know, a professional whose job it is to apparently, tape women having sex without their consent and send it
Hmm.
off to their husbands.
Yeah.
Um, when Therese is regretting this and is berating herself for just saying yes to everything and wanting this, but then putting them in such a world of trouble, Carol then says, I took what you give, or I took what you gave gladly.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and I think that is a confirmation of just how much both of them really, really, of course, wanted this. So that line about, yeah, I want to see you keeping the light on, for sure. There's a conversation happening, even if the start was not so verbal.
Yeah.
So I think you're right.
Yeah.
But yeah, bold as hell. Really very hot. Good job, Cate. Good job, everyone involved in this film. Love it. When I first saw it, I was like, whatever, it's short. But little did I know that there's a dearth of
Mm.
of good love scenes in mainstream film. So
Yeah, totally. And it is, to your point, it is short. They don't linger on it. But I think this is also just to the economy of the whole movie. Like, they don't linger on anything. Like, I think there is an economy to the drama of this film. Like, everything moves smoothly, but also most of the scenes are short. Except, like, I think the longest scene is that first scene of them that we already talked about, when they're in the diner and having lunch. But that's to establish the relationship. But everything after that is sort of just moves along. Like, the thing I noticed was this movie, and I just watched it yesterday again for, I don't know, the millionth time, but it just moves so fast. Like, it's slightly just under 2 hours, but it just moves so fast. Like, I was just started it and then it ended, and I was like, wow, where has the time gone? But that's because you get enveloped in this love story.
Absolutely. Yeah,
So
that's funny. It is very, very economic. I'd never thought about that. It's a 2.5 hour economic film.
yeah. So we have lots to talk about with Carol. We're going to talk about Cate's performance, about Rooney's performance, about Sarah Paulson, about some other scenes we like. But before we get to that, Shayna, I wanted to ask you about your newsletter. You have a newsletter that I think maybe our listeners would like to know about.
I do have a newsletter. You can subscribe to it at shaynamaci.substack.com. And it's just a place for me to write off whatever I'm thinking about queer cinema. Specifically, I focus on lesbian and bi women cinema because that's my niche. It's what I love to watch. And occasionally you also get some ridiculousness, like an ode to the Catherine Hahn bisexual cinematic universe.
Oh, I want to read that one.
Oh yeah. Oh yes, you do. This I will not be shy about this. That's probably the best piece I've ever written. So if you wanna hear some ridiculousness that is not at all professional and it's truly just me writing about the stuff I love and recommending queer films, that's shaynamaci.substack.com.
I love reading Shayna's stuff. I didn't know about your newsletter until right now, but I am going to hit that subscribe button immediately.
Ooh, another subscriber.
So let's talk more about Carol. So I could talk about this movie a lot, but one thing that I really wanted to talk about is sort of the chemistry between Cate and Rooney. So when I first started this podcast, there is a question that I would ask every guest at the end of the show. I was like, who do you think was Cate's best on-screen partner? And everyone would say Rooney Mara. And I know people love this movie and love this relationship and the actors. And so after a little bit, I tried to change the question a little bit, to just so that, not every podcast is the same. But the thing is, when you're right, you're right. Like, I think Rooney Mara is Cate's best screen partner. And one of the other things is that, we talked about also in this podcast, is that Cate sometimes seems a little too smart for the other men that she acts with, that as if they kind of don't deserve her. But maybe finally with Rooney or with Judi Dench, she found somebody who can be like on her level. Because I think, I love Brad Pitt, but I don't think they're the same. But Rooney actually manages to be.
Yeah. I think Rooney definitely is a very intelligent actor. Super, super observant and an intelligent performer. And I love watching her and Cate in this. Is this still the question that I'm answering of my favorite or the best on-screen pairing with Cate?
Yes.
Okay. Well, obviously I'm on the Carol episode, so but that would be too easy. So I have to say, I also love Cate Blanchett and Sandra Bullock in Ocean's 8. The movie is not great. whatever, it's fine. It's a romp, but it's, not that great. But I think that Kate and Sandy have a really fun time. So I definitely consider that to be up there in terms of chemistry.
Yes, give us Ocean's 9. Let's get more Kate and Sandy.
Please. And also, can we just make it explicit already? Like, we get it. We know they're all gay.
Yeah, totally. Like,
missed opportunity, in my opinion.
I mean, the actors might be straight, but none of those characters in Ocean's 8 are straight.
No, none of those characters. Oh my God. Cate Blanchett, like, her greatest dream in life is to own a motorcycle?
Yes, I know,
What?
right?
That's a dyke on a bike. Like, I don't, what are you trying to say,
But I also want to talk a little bit about Rooney in this movie. So, when this movie first came out, there was all this talk of like, who gives the best performance? Is it Kate or Rooney? And, there was, at least among my friend group, a little bit of a fight. Obviously, I will always, I will always thumb for Kate. Kate gives the best performance in every movie she's in. Excuse me, in my opinion. But I have to say, like, Rooney is amazing in this movie, and we should give her props. And even though I used to get into fights, I'm like, no, she's not as good as Rooney. But I think that's just me being facetious. She's not good as Kate. That's just me being facetious. I think she is amazing, and I think she has an arc here where she starts as this very naive, younger woman, and she grows. She matures in front of you, and it is something to behold, frankly, to see her charting that arc from the beginning until the end. And she's obviously helped by a wonderful script and helped by the costuming and by how she is photographed and lit and all of that. But also her performance is just heartbreaking and so quiet, but there's volcanoes of emotions in it.
Yeah, the costuming helps. The hair is very, very good as a sign of transformation. I do think that she is a different person from the start of the film, or I guess not the start because that's, a flashback, but from the start of her chronological journey with Carol to the end of it, she is a different person, and the choices that she makes are very believable about when she chooses to leave, when she chooses to return. I think that Rooney did an excellent job. And I think that, speaking of kind of going back a little bit, speaking of the chemistry between the two and about this effect on queer culture at large, I love watching interviews with Rooney and Kate.
Yes.
They're so fun. There's one especially that I don't remember what context it was in, what kind of press screening, but an interviewer asks Rooney what it was like to, fall in love with Carol, with Kate's character. And Rooney kind of has a look of panic on her face. And Cate Blanchett says, well, sweetheart, do you want to answer that? And you can just see the Therese and Carol just continuing this
dynamic.
Playful dynamic. Yeah. So I think that Rooney did an excellent job, but I also think that some of that might have been real, of playing opposite Cate Blanchett, and it just worked. It just worked so well for this dynamic for these characters.
Yeah, I'm so happy you brought up the interviews, because I think I've also seen a lot of interviews of the two of them during that time when the movie came out. And there is a lot where Rooney does say that it was easy to fall in love with Kate, because how could you not? It was somebody she has looked up to for years, and then to meet her and to find out that she's this, wonderful person in real life, as she thought she would be. It was easy to sort of play that she loved her.
May we all be so lucky in our jobs,
Right? That we work with Cate Blanchett, right? Yeah, we should be so lucky. But I also, when we talk about the interviews and the red carpets and all the pictures, and I think this is sort of what all the pictures of Kate and Renu together, and sort of their friendship, or the way they enjoyed each other. I don't know, we are projecting. I don't know if these women are actually friends in real life or not. But anyway, from what we could glean on from those moments, that they were in front of cameras, whether in the movie or in the press tour, they seemed to really enjoy each other's company. And I think it sort of created this buzz that around them and around the relationship between Carol and Therese that sort of just helped feed the cultural impact of this movie, because people were, yes, they share memes from and, GIFs from the movie, but also people are very happy sharing pictures and memes of them just, on the press tour.
Yeah, exactly. It's a meme, but it's a very genuine interest and delight, I think, in the press tour character of it all. Definitely. No, Murtada, it's all real.
And I love that you say delight, because I think this is the one thing that I love about the Carol fan or the Carol community, is that there is always just delight and appreciation for the movie and for these actors and what they did. Like, there is no and if there is listeners, like, there is no negativity towards this movie, and if there is, I haven't found it in 6 years, so I'm happy not to find it.
Yeah, ignorance is bliss.
Yeah,
I'll be in my cave of just, everybody loves Carol, it's fine. I think that there is some grouping pushback where Carol always gets grouped into this this category of, allegedly straight actors playing gay roles. And I completely understand like this kind of exhaustion with it. But I also think that sometimes people unfairly group in really good movies with really blah ones. And I would say that, there's a lot to be said about straight and gay actors being able to play whomever they would like. And I hope that queer actors will be booked, basically, have their stars rise and be considered for any part that they want. And I'll also say that I think that this movie is so good that that sort of criticism is allowed to exist and not dismantle it.
yeah, totally. I agree with you 100%. I'm all for queer actors, like you said, getting booked and getting opportunities. But also, I love Carol because of these performances, who are, by alleged straight people. But they are wonderful. Like, actors should be able to play whomever they want. Or who, as long as there is, equal opportunity for everyone, there is not, which is why these conversations are important to have.
Exactly. Certainly. And I think it is, I'm sure you've had this conversation before. I think it's important to note also that when we say actors can play anybody, there are a lot of limitations.
Yes, totally.
Of course. And I think that we're in a climate where it's being discussed more, but not always acted upon. Like, people can say, yeah, sure, I watched Disclosure. For sure. We know about that one film that elucidates a little bit of the history of trans people on screen. But there does continue to be casting that truly, when you look at it, you're like, what dumbass, made this decision. So I want to put that qualifier.
Yes, asterisk, absolutely. I did not mean, I'm definitely for Cate as Carol, but I'm definitely against Eddie Redmayne in The Danish Girl. Let me just be clear.
I'm against The Danish Girl.
Absolutely, yes.
I'm going to be very clear on that.
But let's go back to Carol and more happy thoughts and a movie that we love instead of that other one that we don't want to talk about.
Please. I'm so sorry for derailing this. Thank you, Shauna. Let's bring it back here.
No, don't worry about it. No, that was an important point to make. So we were talking about the interviews and Cate and Rooney and all of that, but I think this movie sort of like lives by the memes and sort of like all the other intangible things that are around it, like the memes, like the Harold We're Lesbians. I think everybody who's listening to this podcast knows what Harold We're Lesbians is. And it's a meme that I've discussed with Kate Halliwell when we did Ocean's 8. So if you haven't listened to that podcast, go listen to that one. We discuss it in detail in that one. So I won't I won't go into it, but it is such a funny meme that people went into this movie, I think, as just a prestige Oscar film in the holiday season, and they didn't know it was a lesbian story, and then they find out, and I'm like, it's so funny to me that meme is the funniest thing about Carol, I think.
Wow. That I think so. I think that is carried over. I think that was maybe the first thing I heard about Carol, actually. The Harold, they're lesbians. Just a classic.
That is a classic, but also one of my favorite things is this picture of Cate and Rooney, and this is after Waterloo, or it's before Waterloo, when the guy sort of tailing them comes and tries to sell them some magazines or whatever. And they're completely, at least Cate definitely 100%, is not interested in anything he's saying. And Rooney's kind of sort of trying to be nice, trying to humor him. Like, she's definitely not interested, but also maybe doesn't want to be rude. And so that picture of like Cate and Rooney looking at this man with disdain and like, why are you interrupting us, has like burst so many memes. Like so many people use this picture to talk about, humorless men and what men do when two women just want to have breakfast or whatever, want to have a conversation, want to talk to each other, anything. And I love that picture all the time. It's my favorite thing.
Oh my God. Can I tell you about one of my favorite memes?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So it does not actually, okay, it's a several layers of a meme, and I'm sure you've already talked about it on this podcast, actually. But it is featuring what I think is one of the most important parts of Carol, which is the score. Gorgeous score.
Carter Burwell.
Yes. So evocative. So I think it's what makes so much of it move so fluidly. And really helps with that. Again, you're talking about this visualization of falling in love. That score, anytime I hear that score, I'm like, oh boy, somebody's falling in love, in infatuation. And there is one of my all-time favorite videos, things that the internet has produced, is from a round table. It's
oh my God.
Actors round table. Yes. You know what I'm talking about.
I know, but please tell me.
Yes. So it is, somebody has put maybe a 30-second compilation together, and it's of a Hollywood Reporter Actors Roundtable. So people who are in talks for Oscar nominations.
Yeah.
And it features the conversations and the body language between Rachel Weisz and Kathryn Hahn. And it pastes the Carol score over it as well. There was some great editing going on. There are some very choice zooms, some choice effects on Kathryn Hahn's completely infatuated agreement with everything Rachel Weisz has to say, zooming in on where their hands are placed. And it is gorgeous. And I think that the Carol score just makes it like, Carol is a movie about infatuation and fantasy, and this gorgeous unspoken but direct love between these two women, and I get all of those feelings from the score. So pasting it over the Kathryn Hahn and Rachel Weisz little romance is one of my favorite things I've ever seen. It's
oh my God.
Cool.
I know that, and I love it, and I've seen it, and I'm going to link it on the page for this podcast. So if you want to see it, go to sundayswithkate.com and find this podcast. It will be the last one, so just find it, and you can watch this. It's so much fun, and I love it. And I think the role of the interrupter to the infatuation in that is played by Glenn Close in that video.
Yes. It's the best little tale of a film. It's a short film. It's really a short film.
Yeah, it's gorgeous. It's so funny, and it's just like, you just watch it, and yes, the Carol score is used to maximum and hilarious effect.
Exactly.
It's so great. I love it. So we talked about how this movie is full of so many rich details and it rewards repeat watching. And you already talked about Mama's Baby, which is a wonderful little thing that you see. Are there any other small things in Carol that maybe people haven't noticed that you can tell them about?
Ooh, oh my goodness. I think that this is unfortunately not focused on Kate and Rooney, but I think that the actor who plays Rooney's boyfriend,
Jake
uh,
Lacey.
yeah, I think that now maybe more people have seen White Lotus, and he's just so good at playing this insufferable man who is offended when everything or when anything like very slightly inhibits his way of seeing the world. And I really like that so much of this film is about inhibiting the way people see the world. So I just think that his performance is excellent.
Yeah.
And
As someone who is so limited in his like vision, in what he sees in life, in what he thinks of anything, like he is like, I can't remember, Richard is his name, I remembered. He's so limited, but the performance is so unlimited. Like it's there's so many layers to it.
I love that. I love that. So I think I appreciated his performance. That's a little thing for me because I don't usually notice those performances.
The guys.
Yeah, yeah. Some guys I do, some guys I do, but a lesbian movie, come on.
Yeah. Who's gonna look at Richard?
And I would also say that I love that Carrie Brownstein is in this movie.
Yes.
So another queer woman who is in there for a millisecond, but I think still is there as a marker of Therese's growth and maturation as a person. And I think that those are probably the most important things that I've just kind of come to be like, oh, that too, that's great, that's amazing. But I would say that most of it is just right there. Everything is in the film.
Yeah.
Everything is in the film. It's one of those things that doesn't actually need any background. And I think the reason it's become so popular as a reference point is because everything is in the film. You don't actually need the press tour. I love the press tour, but you don't need it. You can just watch the film.
It's all in the films. And one of my favorite little moments is it's a little so I love watching Kate and just watching her on screen. And there is a little thing she does early on in the film when Carol is going to the Christmas party that her husband insisted she go to, and Sarah Paulson's Abby is dropping her, and she gets off the car, and her back is to the camera and to Abby, but I think she wants to tell Abby and also us that she's acknowledging Abby. And so she does a little click of her feet together as she's walking away, as if she's saying goodbye to Carol. And I love that. And it's sort of like, it goes to my thesis that Kate is such a wonderful physical actor. And so if you haven't noticed that little bit in Carol, go watch that and you will see it.
I guess I have to rewatch Carol again. Oh no. Sarah Paulson is fantastic in this film.
Yes. She is so wonderful. Absolutely.
The way she stares down Harge, I think, is also a little favorite moment for me.
I can't help you with that.
Yeah, that strength, I think, because she is someone who could be terrorized as well by Harge. You can very clearly see that like he's about to bring his full power as, someone who will never be blamed legally. He's about to bring that to bear on everything that Carol holds close, and Abby could very well be a casualty of that, and she stands her ground, and I love that performance.
Yeah, she's wonderful. And when we talk about sort of like physically, I think later in the film when Abby and Carol are talking and Abby is leaving Carol's house and they sort of clasp arms around each other as they're walking down the stairs. Like, I think that's sort of just, and the camera follows them from behind, and you can see, like, it tells you about the deep bond between them, that no matter what, these two women are going to be in each other's life forever, and they're always going to be the rocks for each other. And it just, like, I think Sarah and Cate have wonderful chemistry. Not romantic chemistry, but this wonderful sort of friendship chemistry, which is very important for all queer people.
Very, very accurate representation, I would say, of at least dyke circles, certainly. That's the only thing I can really talk about. Everything else, I'm just a casual outside observer. But the urge to stay friends with your exes and, in fact, form deep emotional bonds with them is something that is ongoing for me and many queers that I know.
Yeah. Yes. I think it's a little different for people in my circle. Like, personally, I don't want to form any bond with any exes, but I appreciate it.
Yeah. No, you know what? You do you. I think that's very healthy too. Perhaps more so.
Yeah, I appreciate it when I see it with Carol and Abby, for sure.
That's nice for them.
So Shayna, there are so many line readings in this movie that are just so. It's just like we already talked about with A Strange Girl, You Are Flung Out of Space. Can you tell me, if you can, remember on the spot right now, what is your favorite Cate Blanchett line reading? And if you remember one for Rooney, that would be great too.
Oh my God. That's so hard. Of course, Flung Out of Space, The one I can remember for Rooney is when they're in the diner and Rooney, when Therese is taking a picture of Carol and Carol's not prepared and she says, "Oh, I look a fright." And that's when Therese says, "No, you look wonderful." And that's when she puts her hand on Carol's, I think, for the first time. And Carol really notices it. I think that's an excellent example of Cate's, whole body acting. And I think it's a really wonderful line reading from Rooney.
Yeah, I love that moment. So Carol is not a comedy, although it is sometimes funny. And so my favorite line reading of Rooney is when they get somewhere. I think it's when they get the big room or the suite, and they're, Therese and Carol are at the hotel concierge, and they're booking the room, and the person there offers them a bigger room or a suite, and Carol doesn't want to take it because I guess she doesn't want to take advantage. But Rooney sort of like, this is where Therese becomes bold, and she's like, "We should take the big suite," but then she says, if the rate's attractive. And I love that because it's kind of a joke. It's funny because it's not about the rate. We know what it is about. We know, Therese, you finally want to do this. And so the way she says it, it's kind of a joke, but it's also funny, but it's also like, oh my God, they're going to do it. So I love that moment.
Oh my God, that's so funny. You say Carol's not a comedy. I say Carol is 100%. It is a comedy. I think it's a quiet comedy, just like that line, if the rate is attractive. But I think there are many comedic elements.
Yeah, if the rate's attractive is my favorite Rooney line reading. So listeners, let us know on the comments or on Twitter, Sundays with Cate. What is your favorite line reading for Cate or for Rooney, or just what you love about Carol in general? So Shayna, as I said at the top of the hour, so the reason I was excited to talk to you is, I wanted to talk I wanted to talk about the cultural impact for queer people for Carol, which I think is immense, and I call it a movement. So you mentioned that you had a couple of those moments that you wanted to tell the listeners about.
I really do. So I think that the cult of Carol is not a very scary one. I think it's quite friendly. And I think that some of my favorite comedic bits that really only a queer audience would love have spun from Carol. And one of them I really want to shout out is actually a comedian's routine. Her name is Kelly Quinn. And I saw this routine at something that was hosted by another actually podcast that was it was a Dyke specific podcast, and they had a show, like a holiday themed show called Dyke the Halls. And it was a variety show. It was so fun. And this bit that popped up throughout the show was this comedian, KQ, Kelly Quinn, doing a bit in which she was Rindy and she was looking for Carol. So she wandered out onto the stage and started doing has anybody seen my mom? I'm missing her. She always brushes my hair, and now my hair's all messy. Has anyone seen Carol? She left with Therese, with someone who looks just like me. So I just thought that was a brilliant bit. And I want to say, KQ, if you ever listen to this podcast, thank you. Thank you for that.
I'll link to that. You'll have to send me the link so I can link it.
I will.
I love that. I wish I've seen that. And I mean, there's also the Carol Support Group, which is a comedy bit that I think became a short film. It's about all the people who can't quit watching Carol. We'll link to that too. That is so funny. It's a short film that you can watch. So there are lots of these things that came, and to what we were talking about, they're all sort of inclusionary and all wonderful and delightful, and all are just like, come on, let's all revel in our love for Carol and talk about it, and enjoy this film even more.
Absolutely. It just lends itself to it.
Yeah. One of my favorite things also, just like there's so many memes, but there is that scene of Cate when she's, she delivers one of her other major lines where she says, "We're not ugly people, Harge." But right before that, she's sitting down and she's kind of shaking. And that image of her and that gif of her sort of like just shaking, like I've seen so many people share that little bit and, title it "gay shaking," which is just so funny. Whenever something like, big happens or whatever, it could be used in so many contexts, but it is totally gay shaking. And I love that bit too.
That is a really beautiful scene as well, certainly. And I think one that plays out in a lot of gay films and dramas and melodramas, because it was such a true situation that still has effects right now.
Yeah, totally. Oh. And I think that's one of, like, when we talk about Carol was a book, but I think Carol the movie owes its brilliance to the screenwriter, Phyllis Nagy. And that scene is definitely something that she came up with. Because when you read the book is told completely 100% from Therese's point of view. Because that's how Patricia Highsmith told that story. But all the scenes that are Carol without Therese, they're in the book, there are allusions to them or they're mentioned in passing. But I think what Phyllis Nagy's brilliant script, what it does here is that it dramatizes that. And it gives us this other dimension to Carol that is not in the book, but it just adds more. And so I just love the screenplay, and I think she did such a brilliant job adapting this.
Makes her a real person. Yeah. Thanks, Phyllis.
I know. Thank you, Phyllis. We love Phyllis Nagy. So, Shayna, thank you so much for coming on Sundays with Cate. This was such a wonderful conversation. Before we go, let our listeners know where they can find you and your work.
So, thank you so much for having me, Murtada. This was a delight, as everything related to Carol is. As I said, you can find my writing, shaynamaci.substack.com. You can also find me on Instagram. I'm very online, unfortunately. It's at Bernadette Teeters. It's like Bernadette Peters, but it's sillier. So that's mostly where you can find me.
Yeah, and Shayna's a great follow, so give her a follow. And you can find me on Twitter at ME_says, or follow the podcast on Twitter and Instagram at Sundays with Cate. And until next time, thank you for listening.